Well, a big welcome to fellow XS650 owners. This is going to be a little module about carburettors. These particular ones are BS38s and they're the late style. There are two types of late style. One is the 76-77 model. The other is the 78-79, and they are different. There are some differences on the carbs, particularly the slides and the needle jets and the jet needles are different and they're not really compatible. You can't swap parts between them. They have to come as a complete assembly, and this particular set of carbs that I've obtained have been mixed and put together by someone that really doesn't understand the differences between the two carbs, and consequently they've got all sorts of issues with them, not least of which I've noticed is this is on back to front. That's quite interesting. This link bar here that links the two carbs and holds them together is on back to front. It should be the other way around, but this way on, obviously it makes it a lot easier to get your screwdriver on the screws for the bowls, the fuel bowls, and the fuel bowls to get on and off. When it's the correct way round, it will fit the bike properly, because obviously this way round it won't. But it does make it quite a bit more difficult to get the fuel bowls off. But anyway, so aside from that, the reason that this particular video is being made is about the chokes. On this late style 78-79 carb, it's a vertical choke, so in other words the chokes are pulled up vertically and they're not set in the carbs on a horizontal way. Now in this particular set, this is a very common problem that people do when they clean their carbs, put them back together and rebuild them, put them on the bike, and they find that the starting and idle and running is erratic, especially when it's cold, and they get a much too rich a mixture. And partly the reason for this quite often is that the chokes don't fully return after they've been operated. And if you check on this one, you can see quite clearly that once you put the choke on and release it, it doesn't always return the chokes. So if you put your finger on the top, you can see that now is typical, isn't it? It won't repeat the fault that it had before. But quite often you'll find that these chokes don't fully reseat, and then you get a rich mixture, obviously. Now once they're on the bike, it's extremely difficult to check this, and almost impossible to reset them and jiggle and tweak them so that they work properly. So it must be done on the bench before you go and put them on. And it's a critical test, really. It's an essential part of checking that the carburetors have been put together right and set right. And what you need to do really is obviously make sure that there's a nice smooth movement with this and it doesn't stick anywhere. Now you have got a spring here, a spring clip that holds the choke partially on there, and that doesn't look to me to be in the right position. It's nowhere near full choke, but anyway, what I would recommend is that before you assemble this, let's just take that piece off so that that's not interfering with the operation. Now it's more easy to check this. So now that's free, you want to make quite sure that that lever is completely free to move. It must be very loose, like that. Not coming off, obviously. If that's done up too tightly and hasn't got the correct number of washers in the right places, and that's stiff to operate, then that will not function properly and the chokes will not return as they should. So first of all, make sure that that's nice and loose, which it is. Now, I would recommend actually, let's take this off so we can see very clearly what's happening here. Take the whole assembly off. Right, now we can test the actual lever without anything else interfering with it. And we can lift the chokes and pull them back. And that really needs to be a nice smooth operation that returns fully. And these are not returning fully every time. And they're stiff to operate, to pull up as well. So first of all, obviously what you should have done is you should check the individual chokes before this assembly is put on to make sure that the actual chokes are not sticking or binding in the chambers there. That one there seems quite smooth, but there is something sticking somewhere. And the next thing is, once the rod is put through and these are tightened, there is a little indent which positions the two levers. Those levers, as they lift the chokes simultaneously, must be nice and smooth, and you need to look at the fingers on those to make sure that they're working properly. So let's just take this off and check this. Right, and that will just now slide out, hopefully, because it won't. There we go. Right. And here are the fingers that lift the chokes. And it's very important that these surfaces here, where the chokes run on, as they're lifted, you see that bit there, it's being lifted here, they need to be very smooth with no burrs and no rough bits. And you really need to check that it is so. And if it's not, then you need to get a file and file that surface on the top there, smooth file, just to remove any burrs or any digs or indents that you can see there. I mean, I'm just doing a very crude, rough job here. This needs to be done very carefully, and put this in a vise or something, obviously, so you can work on it easily. And once that's done, then you need to just address the inner edge there where the brass bit of the choke rubs on. So you want to remove any burrs there. Should have a vise for this ready. That inner edge, both sides, is very important. It needs to be nice and smooth. And then use some wet and dry paper and really make it nice and smooth, so it's got a lovely smooth surface and a smooth action. And all these little bits of work will help reduce any friction in the system, will make it operate better. So now we can check the individual chokes, and that really does need to be smooth. If it's sticking anywhere, then we need to address that as well and clean these up, maybe put a bit of grease on them, and make sure that they're returning nice and smartly, which they do seem to be. Yep, they're quite good. So, there's no problem with the chokes themselves. So the problem here is going to lie with the bar and the levers, I suspect. But the other thing I will show you that you need to check also is, let's put this back in. And ideally, once you get this working properly, you should number these and mark them left and right so that you keep them in the same relative positions, and make things a lot easier every time you take it apart. Come on. Okay, so what have I done wrong here? Yes, I put it in upside down. Here we go. Alright. And we'll find the right position for the indentation, which will hopefully bring the levers back into the correct position every time where it's been set. There we go, we've got a lovely smooth operation. Now another thing to watch here is that when you're putting these cars back together, if you, that's the wrong screwdriver, let's use the right one. If the carbs are too tight together or too far apart when they're done up, that will affect the operation of the chokes also, because it affects the spacing of these two levers between each other. So again, you have to make sure that you've got a nice smooth operation before you do those up finally. So what I would tend to do is I'd loosen them a little bit, and you can get a little bit of adjustment on this bar. This doesn't need to go the other way around, of course. So now you've got a little bit of play there. Look, you can see there's some play. And by using that little bit of play, you can line this up so that The chokes lift really nicely and smoothly, and they return properly, as they should, without sticking at all. And then retighten the screws. Lovely jubbly, that's nice and smooth. Wouldn't hurt to put a bit of grease in there, in that pivot there and there as well. I look for every little bit of advantage I can get. Just make sure that is nice. That's it, that's going to return properly. And then we assemble the lever. We've already checked that's okay. What a fiddly mechanism this is. Come on, give me a break. Okay. On my bike I've actually converted this to a handlebar choke lever rather than have this down on the carb. It's so much easier. Now again, before the spring goes on, just make sure that it's not sticking, and it is. You see that stuck there? Something is still sticking. And that's what you've got to eliminate. So it has to be something to do with what we've added to it, which is this. And that seems quite loose. So maybe it's sticking in here. Yeah, I suspect that's what it is. Because it can't be this, we've already checked all that in the chokes. So now we're looking at something wrong with this lever. And as that's nice and loose, it has to be to do with the alignment, looking down here, between this bar, this lever, and the bar there. And I can see now that there's no room, there's no gap there. If you look down there where that pivot goes right into the hole there, it's just tight on there. And what we'll need to do is space this off the carb body so we get a bit of a gap there. So again, that's not going to stick. That's where the friction is in this. You can see it's not returning every time, and it's a bit stiff to operate. And that's all it needs, an extra washer. So there's another thing to watch out for. It's not easily spotted. It's only when you get a problem and you go into this that you start to see all these little bits that contribute here to a properly smooth running carb. Right, so that's the next step then. Take this off and add another washer.